Welcome to another Figure Week, Hard Surface Week, Organic Week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Aldouri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learn in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important, and that's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. Hoping you guys are all enjoying a lot of the conditions at the moment and keeping strong and confident with your projects that are keeping you sane. I know that the world is still a bit topsy-turvy, but I'm glad that you guys can come here and chill out with me and talk with some amazing people. Speaking of amazing people, we have another person on today who is amazing, someone who I've also wanted on for a while, that I met way back in an event, and always loved the enthusiasm and the intelligence that she brought to her role. So today we are joined by Marina Alexandra Bade. How are you doing?
Hey Gordon, I'm doing great, thank you.
Yeah, awesome, good. I was as long as it's nothing like I'm doing really shit or I've had a horrible day, but yeah, if you're doing well, I'm glad.
No,
yeah.
great.
So we met way back. I think it was either Playgrounds or maybe IW. I'm trying to remember the first time we met, but it was a couple of years back, right? 2017, 2018, maybe something like that.
Most likely.
Yeah.
Definitely know we met at industry workshops, 2018.
A couple of events, yeah, on and off for the last couple of years, and yeah, like when I first met you, you were, I think, just building towards your first job. I think you were still in your master's, right? Were you still studying at the time, or?
I actually never did a master's. I just did my bachelor's.
Yeah, still
but-
impressive. Yeah.
Took me 5 years, but never mind.
Yeah.
No, but I think I was still studying. Yeah, probably.
Right. Yeah.
Just
And
about
then-
like doing an internship or something, maybe.
Right. Yeah, and just starting off. But now, for people who don't know, what is your current title and where are you currently working?
So my current title is technical artist. I'm in a mid-level position. So I started off as a junior, and I was promoted to a mid-level. And I currently work at Splash Damage in London.
Yes, Splash Damage, well known, of course, for the I say the games that they've done, but the kind of collaborations they've had with different studios and doing extensions and multiplayers. And I mean, I know that Coalition is one of the big collabs that you've done the last couple of years, working in Gears of War. And of course, with your title, technical artist, that's something I think that is one of the reasons we had you on today as well, because it is. I wouldn't say a mystery because people probably do know the extensions of what a technical artist is, but then maybe not in depth as you know what the job is because you're obviously working day to day in it. So maybe as a brief overview to begin with, what is a technical artist?
So a technical artist is a person who facilitates art content in a way that it goes into the engine, it goes into the game in an optimized, well-organized, useful manner. And somebody who basically is very good at communicating with programmers, with artists, basically with actually everyone, is able to pull teams together and is able to, for example, spot the need for custom tools for workflow improvements and actually act on these.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you would say that probably the overview of what you've just said is that you really facilitate the pipeline and make sure that that whole transition runs smoothly between art and tech and all other parts of the departments within Splash Damage. So how did you initially get into that field or the way of thinking that you were going to do that kind of job? Was it something early on that you were thinking about while you were studying?
Actually, no, not at all. I started out, actually, I did an apprenticeship first. I did a 2-year school apprenticeship where I learned stuff like Photoshop and a little bit of 3ds Max. And it was, unfortunately, it was very, very shallow and definitely not something that would adequately prepare you for a job. So I decided, or I always knew I wanted to study anyway. So I went for a course that's actually quite broad. So I studied animation and game in Darmstadt in Germany. And for me, it was a really good course because it started off very broad. Because again, I had no clue what I wanted to do. And basically, from semester to semester, I kind of was like, maybe I want to be a modeler. All right, maybe I want to be a texture artist or like a material artist. Or maybe I want to be, a little bit more technical. And really, over the time, I kind of started to build up more confidence because I was very, very unconfident in my technical abilities, basically most of my life, in my math skills, in my technical skills. And then actually towards the last semester, I want to say the last 2 semesters, I was like, okay, I think tools and especially procedural tools are really fun and it's very interesting, and I can pair it with something that I love as well, which is just environment art and modeling, texturing, making materials, which is my personal just artistic corner that I like. And I combined it, and that was where I found the most success and the most fun.
So then when you talk about math especially and you talk about coding, is that something that you were teaching yourself like in the beginning stages, or was that something you went to school for initially, or something you took an interest in early on in your education, or is it just something you picked up as you were building the skill set?
I must say I was always very interested in math, but I was never very good at it.
Okay.
I want to say to a degree that came down to having not the most optimal teachers, but obviously you can never blame them. No, definitely nobody taught it to me. Okay, unfortunately.
Right.
Which is
so you were self-taught mostly for most of it.
Yes, I had to. I did tutorials. It's basically all online. I was, again, as I said, I was studying, but I think it's very seldomly the case that your course actually provides you with all the information you need. So
Right.
as I was actually very niche at that point, and there was no
Mhm.
specialization in tech art in a sense
Mhm.
that isn't only rigging.
Mhm.
Also, I thought in the beginning tech art is rigging, and I unfortunately really don't like rigging. So I was
Okay,
like,
right.
I'm never going to be tech art.
You
This is
don't have to like
horrible.
everything. It's
I
fine.
hate
It's
it.
fine.
So yeah, I was in the beginning of my studies. I was like, tech art is horrible. It's rigging. I don't like rigging. I'm not going to do this.
Right.
But obviously, I was definitely schooled in that. Tech art can be very, very different from that.
Right.
So yeah, I had to teach it myself.
Mhm.
But I think it's actually a good thing. Like finding your interest, being able to find the material online is a huge privilege of our time.
Yeah.
And I was able to kind of piece together all the information I needed and kind
Mhm.
of come up with a project for myself and then learn it as needed, right?
Right.
And then expanding on areas that I really enjoyed, was interested in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the same with my partner at the moment. I mean, she knew very little to almost nothing about coding, but within the 6 month course that she done, she went from nothing to being a developer. You know, so I think people have this precognition that tech and coding is something that's almost impossible, right? It's something you can't learn, you can't teach yourself. You have to be naturally gifted at math. You have to be naturally, yeah. And you're shaking your head. You're totally like, yeah, of course, that's a lot of this bullshit, yeah. So what were the steps you kind of took, or what were the approaches you had when you initially started learning? Did you also have the same? You know, I mean, now you know, but back then, did you think the same of like this would be impossible or couldn't do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was completely I was incredibly I thought I was completely incompetent in anything that had to do with tech.
Right.
And I think because of that mindset, I often screwed up when it came to technical things because I was like, I cannot do this anyway. I will
Right.
not be able to retain this information anyway. I just want it to be over. Like
You're
just
sabotaging yourself. Yeah.
yeah, it's just like, oh, just show me how to do it. Do it once. I don't even want to listen. I don't want to even have anything to do with this because I will only experience my
Right.
level of incompetence.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think that's like just avoidance, right?
Yeah.
And I
Of course.
remember some situations and projects where I was like, oh, blueprints are the absolute hell. It's so hard. I don't understand anything.
Right.
But on the other hand, I
Uh-huh.
didn't sit down and I didn't
Mhm.
actually be like, okay, I'm going to understand this now because it's
Right.
not magic. And I
Yeah.
think the moment that this kind of switch came, I was like, okay,
Mhm.
this is not magic. You
Right.
can, if you put in the effort and the time
Yeah.
and calm your brain and stop the panic, you're going to be fine.
You can learn, right?
Yeah.
Which is great, I think, because just speaking briefly on the podcast in general, like I think when I first started the podcast back in 2016, which is 5 years ago now, when I went to industry workshops and sat down and watched Titus Lunter paint, right, I thought that was magic, right? It was voodoo stuff. Like, I don't know how you're doing this. Please explain it to me. But when he starts breaking down brushes and layers, then you start to just click and you're like, oh, okay, this isn't like, you know, magic. There's a method to it. Same when, I mean, I'm working as a 3D modeler now, right? But like, when I first opened Maya, I looked at all the buttons. I was like, "Oh my god, you know, where do I start?" Like, but it's the same with you, right? Like, it's just crazy to think that every subject matter I've approached in this podcast, people always sit on the other end and be like, "Oh, I knew nothing at the start. I knew nothing when I began." So
It's
I mean,
fine to be really bad at it in the beginning.
yeah, because well, the failure thing is like, and that's the thing I'm noticing with the people I speak to now who are in my Discord or on the podcast, who are students, are like, you know, I'm so afraid that I'm going to try this and I'm going to suck at it. I'm like, well, you have to suck at something to eventually be good at something. So failure is a major part of learning. Yeah. So with the learning process you undertook, you know, and again with resources, because this was a key thing we talked about. When I left my job in 2012, like ArtStation wasn't even a thing, right? There was hardly, you know, Gnome DVDs were still a thing that people were resourcing. So when you started your journey, how were you building your confidence into, you know, branching into tech art or thinking about how to teach yourself the maths part of it?
Actually, I think for me the big thing that made the biggest difference for me was finding tutorials online that had a fixed endpoint, a goal, and that
Okay.
very thorough. And I can tell you why, because my fear, or like my fear still is, let's say I'm making a tutorial, doing a tutorial, I find something online that I enjoy, and my fear is it doesn't work the way that this person is doing it on the screen. Why is my thing not working? And
Right.
I found some tutorials where I really had the feeling that the person presenting was incredibly thorough. It
Mhm.
was very in depth. It's not
Mhm.
like, oh, just do it like this and no explanation. And I was confident, not in myself to a degree, I was confident in the person that that I would be able to do what they did. And I'm a very big fan of copying others, kind of being like, I'm just gonna do exactly what you did because you will learn so much in that process.
Right.
Like, you know, when you start to learn to write, you just copy,
Mhm.
copy, copy, copy. And it's
Of
the same
course, yeah.
process. And I feel like you don't even have to be bothered with making anything unique in the first couple years.
Of course.
You don't have to. You can if you want to. If you have great
Mhm.
ideas, do it.
Mhm.
But I always felt like coming up with something of my own is very
Mhm.
hard if you do not have the basis. So having someone else come up with something and then just copying that person and actually
Right.
achieving the same results and then
Mhm.
maybe starting the thinking process of, oh, what could I do with this? How could I continue? That
Right.
is really what kickstarted my process 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's very like, I mean, again, talk about my partner, but she actually studied, her master's is in linguistics, and she speaks several languages, you know, being Dutch and you know, her mum being French. And she was saying that with dialect, it's the same, right? You listen to something, you listen, repeat, you copy, you learn the language, and then eventually when you have enough words, you can form your own sentences. So it's the same with your mass approach, your tech approach, that you build these tools that you copy of people and you get to know, and then once you've got enough, you can start building your own things.
Yeah.
So it's very, I mean, even with painting, it's the same, right? We all know master studies are a thing, right? People who want to get better, they copy things, they make things,
Yeah.
replicate, and yeah. So yeah, again, it's great that these correlations are the same as other artistic practices. That there is these tent poles that are the same. So yeah. And
Yeah,
was that when
absolutely.
you were doing the tutorials that were in depth? Was this math specifically or something
No.
related to tech? Right. Okay.
For me, it was actually Houdini. So I got into this complete tech art world solely through Houdini. And
Okay.
and even though maybe, like, I know I will continue working in Houdini definitely in the future, but even though maybe at some point, and actually for the last I want to say the last 2.5 years of 3 years that I worked professionally, I have not worked with Houdini professionally. So I did something completely
Okay.
different, even though I only got the job because of my Houdini experience. And the
Okay.
reason why that actually makes sense is because Houdini is an incredibly great gateway to maths, to visual maths, to being able to visualize logic, understanding logic, and kind of quickly iterating over problems and solving problems really quickly. And every time, like, I kind of want to, for example, I want to solve something in UE4 materials. I will go to Vex and to Houdini to prototype it because I tell you it's faster for me at least. And I'm
Right.
like, this is how I want to do it. And then I kind of clunkily try to translate it into the way that materials work.
Right.
That's just because for me, Houdini is like the easiest language, the easiest sandbox to work in.
Right.
And coming in over this gateway just worked really well because I'm such a visual person. Like, I have to draw everything up, I have to see everything, I have to have total control over my data. And I feel like, as opposed to, for example, materials sometimes, or even blueprints, it's much more obscure, right? So Houdini to me always was very direct and I know exactly what's happening at this point.
Right. Okay.
And that helped me a lot. So that's how I got into all of the subjects. Like,
It seems like, I mean, I suppose it's the same when you think about getting into 3D art, is that, you know, people are like, should I use Blender? Should I use Max? Should I use Maya? You know, do I need to learn about texturing? Do I need to learn engine work? You know, there's almost so much or too much people think to learn. But I know for me, when I've kind of learned things, I've tried to have a narrow focus. I mean, I've dabbled in Blender here and there, but I'm like, well, Maya is now at the point where, like, the technology and the software is out of my way. I'm just making things with it. I'm not searching for menus, I'm searching for buttons. So when it comes to Houdini, what would you say is the biggest obstacle you found initially that you overcame when you were learning the software? Was it technically just learning how the software worked, or was it trying to get it to do something specific when you were first building generators or, you know, math within it? I mean, and it's probably a quite in-depth question, but is there anything you can think of that maybe when you first learned it, it was really a struggle or something that you stuck for a while?
I want to say that actually dealing with some of the internal nodes was a problem for me because they're sometimes quite clunky,
Okay.
which is why I actually started to nearly only write code in Houdini because it's so easy
Right.
and so fast, very quickly. It's a very also Houdini is an amazing software to learn coding because
Right.
Vex is a shader language. It's very C close to C from its like terminology and everything. It's really
Okay.
easy to write, easy to understand,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, actually, I never had any issues with. I when I learned Houdini, it was like I found something that was easy for me.
Right.
It was never hard
Right.
in
Okay.
that sense, but only because I had
Uh-huh.
I had amazing tutorials to follow.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So,
And
but
I
then with
followed one tutorial, not 20. As you said, narrow focus. I did one really big one, not 20 small ones.
okay, right. So I was just about to ask you. So, like, I mean, for me, I know that the chamfer zone tutorials have been something that I've definitely went back to in 3D Connection. Like, there's things like that where, you pick one person that you kind of latch to that think is like this thing for me, the thing that I'm going to follow. Although I haven't seen a lot of stuff with Houdini, is this something that you accessed via? Was it a tech art website or something that you went
No,
to?
it's actually, I don't know if you know her, but it was the Lake Houses tutorial by Anastasia Opara.
Okay, no, I don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a massive, I think, oh my God, don't let me lie, easily 6, 7, 8 hour series where
Wow.
she starts really from nothing and makes a complete building generator, like very specific. Like she does things very differently from how I do them now for games, for example. But her
Okay.
focus was more like, I want to have a nice generator in Houdini and I want to make
Mhm.
like a nice rendering in the end. But that's
Right.
fine. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
this sounds great. It's
Mhm.
8 hours. I guess it's like fairly in depth. And yes, it was. It touched on tons of maths, tons of like
Mhm.
little programming things, logic
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
And doing that, and I spent months on that.
Mhm. Wow.
I spent at least 2 months every day working on that, making my
Wow.
own stuff and not doing
Mhm.
anything else. Because, like, honestly, for like, I want to say every 10 minutes of video, I need easily 30 to 40 minutes in my own work, maybe more.
Right. Yeah. So,
Because
like, you
yeah,
learn, you stop, you take in, you go back.
you
Yeah.
Google,
Right.
you check other resources, but you always come back to your main resource.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's what I
Yeah.
did. So basically, there was something taught, there was some technique. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
cool. Let me look up what's connected to this. Let me try
Right.
out some things, and
Yeah.
that really gave me this. Actually, it was like a crash course. It was
Mhm.
like a 2 months crash course, and it was absolutely worth it because the quality was absolutely amazing. And there are people who have amazing Houdini tutorials. Maths in Houdini is
Mhm.
one, or yeah, also things like she does amazing like procedural mandalas. Like she's
Mhm.
now into machine learning,
Mhm.
and I'm like, yeah, this is
Crazy
absolutely
good.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, how was that initial? Was that just a simple Google search of technical art or Houdini tutorial? Was
yeah,
it
Houdini
something that?
tutorial.
Okay, right. So yeah, I mean, thank God for the internet, right? It's like I honestly struggle to think what the world would be like, especially for our profession, like without it, because there's so much online now. It's just overwhelming. The fact that I mean, Jeremy Estacado was talking about this other day in the Dynasty Empire about how he felt how quickly his learning would have just doubled if he had access to the internet like we have now, and even people who come out and say like, I can't afford this tutorial or this, YouTube is so now full of free stuff
Hmm.
that people will teach, so easily. Do you find that with the Houdini stuff in tech art, it's becoming more commonplace within people teaching it, or is it still quite a niche thing?
I want to say it's still a little bit of a niche thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like people are now much more, because it's a niche thing. I feel like people are more encouraged to share their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really don't feel confident yet
Right.
to do that in any way.
Well, you're still early in your career as well, so yeah.
Exactly. And I'm a very strong believer in only speak when you have something to say and something valuable
Yes.
to add.
Okay.
So, and maybe I'm being overly critical of myself there, but like, I'm always like, oh no, is this worth sharing? Nah, rather not. So,
Yeah, but I mean, it's also you're one of the few, I think, within that industry that is, kind of charging a course, within games especially. But I mean, how was it that you came to Splash Damage, especially because such a big studio, and you were saying that they were your first job, right? So how did you lead from basically student to working full-time professionally in the games industry?
So what I did is again, in my studies, in my semester, we always did a semester project, and I felt very unhappy with the work I was doing there and the opportunities I was getting in the course to a degree. Because obviously, who you work with, who your teammates are, what their interests are, is going to determine what you're allowed to do.
Right.
And in the last semester before my bachelor's degree, I basically, which was a semester after my internship at a German documentary film company,
Okay.
I was like, okay, I have now found out I want to do this Houdini thing. Seems like a cool thing. Seems like it's fun. I really want, and that was before I did all the tutorial stuff. So I was like, okay, I have now 3 months of semester break, and then I will have, I think, 6 months of next semester or something. So in the semester break, I used every day for learning. And I really want to say, if you're studying and you do have a 3 months semester break, for example, like 3 months learning, 3 months semester break, right? Use that time, because it's never going to come back. And so what I did is basically every morning, like I woke up at the specific time, I did my tutorial work, I did some artwork, I took my walk, and I had a very structured day.
Right.
And I learned Houdini. That was my goal, basically. Marina wants to learn Houdini because Marina wants to do something with Houdini in the next semester project.
Right.
And then I was successful with that, and kind of with some friends, we drew up an idea where I could use my skills in for the next semester. And we had to push with quite some pressure to get this idea through. So I was able to start the Shantytown, which was done during studies, right? It was a semester project for me. And I really worked every day in the university. Every morning I was there, every evening I left. And like a job, like I treated everything like a job. Like my studies are my job, right?
Right.
And that way I was able to produce one good artwork.
Right.
Like let's say one good portfolio piece. And I think that's also good advice. You don't need to have 10. One can be enough.
100%.
And I took two. I had I still have an amazing friend. His name is Jonas Hassibi, and he's a concept artist, and he studied with me. He was in my semester project. So while I did all the techie part, and I did the modeling and the texturing, and I really poured my art as well into it and my artistic sense. I always asked, like when it came to rendering and to presenting, I always asked him for conceptual advice and composition advice, because I'm not very good at that stuff. So he kind of drew out the composition, how you have lighting here and this, and with that I was able to make really nice promotional images. And that all combined, the tech, the art, and the promotional images, which then generated some traffic, right? Some attention. That is how I got the first job.
I mean, it seems crazy to think that that one project led into your whole career, but like you said, that can happen so quickly with people who have, even recently somebody shared an environment artist who is also funny enough German and was studying I don't know where specifically, but she's only done maybe 2 full pieces, but those pieces are so well done that she's been flooded with offers and people trying to hire her. But
that can happen.
100%. So I mean, there's probably a big gap between where you are now and where you started, and you can only talk about so many things you've worked on. But what was the process like joining Splash? Were they initially building up from your article and your thing you done with 8 Level, and when people were kind of featuring your stuff, like were they just getting in contact and email and saying, look, we're interested in you coming over to maybe try for the position? Were you doing any kind of art tests? How did that process start?
No, I actually reached out to them. So
okay.
I was in a position where I needed to find a job in London,
right?
Because of my partner, who we decided together that my partner would take a job in London. So actually, while I was doing the semester project, I was on my own in Germany, and I was like, my goal is London.
Right.
and I want to go there.
Yep.
So once and I knew that was in 2018, and I knew that. Excuse me.
Mhm.
I knew that there was industry workshops 2018.
Mhm.
I think July, August or something in London. So I was
Right.
like, okay,
Yep.
Marina, that's your goal. At that
Mhm.
time, your project has to be finished. Actually,
Right.
didn't care that much about the university deadlines, because
Yeah.
why, right? I just
Exactly.
had to send in something, but
Right.
I knew that was my actual deadline. I knew there would
Okay.
be Rocksteady, there would be Splash Damage, there would be Creative Assembly, like all of these, some Guildford
Big
studios as well, I
companies.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I can talk to people there, I can show my portfolio, and I can.
Mhm.
That is my moment, right?
Right.
So I got everything ready. I got everything on the tablet, and I actually just walked around and I spoke to Rocksteady, I spoke to Splash Damage,
Mhm.
and they were all incredible. Like, they were so. I didn't even expect this, but like, they were so interested and so, oh, tech art, that's so cool, which just made me so incredibly happy. It was such a great experience to have
Yeah.
somebody be
Mhm.
interested in your work and actually ask
Yeah.
questions. That
Yeah.
was so cool, because I was just a student, obviously.
Yeah.
So I spoke to an artist at Splash Damage, who's actually also
Right.
still at Splash Damage, and
Mhm.
he was like, "Oh yeah, that's amazing. Here, my contact." And I actually had lunch with a recruiter because he was a friend of a friend,
Right.
and he was like, "Yeah, just send me an email when you come back tomorrow or something." So I sent them an email,
Right.
sent across my portfolio,
Mhm.
and back then, actually, even at that point,
Mhm.
I wasn't calling myself a tech artist, because
Right.
I didn't understand. Like, I think I still had business cards with technical environment artist, which is actually not even a thing. I didn't even
Right.
know the job terminology yet.
Okay.
Like, I'm applying for jobs that I don't know the terminology of. So actually, the recruiter, who's a really great guy, but I was like,
Mhm.
he asked me, so what do you actually want to apply for? And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe environment, maybe tech
Yeah.
art. And he's like,
Yeah.
okay, we consider you for both. So they were
Mhm.
incredibly supportive. We're like, we're considering you for both positions, and then we can see how things go, and you can choose. And well, I
Right.
chose tech art.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems that, I mean, you were in a really advantageous position, especially when it comes to your portfolio and finding the right company. But I mean, I think the reason also they were probably super enthusiastic was because, like you said, yourself that tech art is a niche and that it's not something that's commonplace. So when people find people like that, like, oh my God, we need to cling to this person and, get them on our team, because, as many environment artists as there, there's only maybe, for an environment team of maybe like 20, 30 people, there's maybe only 2 technical artists, right? Sometimes in teams. So within your team, I mean, because you're working specifically within tech art and you're working within the pipeline, how big is, I mean, I don't know if you can talk about how big your team is or how big the technical team is, but are you quite a small condensed team as well within Splash?
You mean the tech art team or the team I
Yeah.
support?
Well, see, this is the thing as well that's going to be new to me, because I wouldn't know where maybe you would sit within that company organization, because you'll have, for me, I would know, like, okay, you've got your producers and you've got your high ups, you've got an environment art team, you've got your concept team, you've got cinematics, a couple lighting, a couple of things like that. But where do you kind of sit within that process? Are you kind of reaching out and helping all of those teams, or maybe one or two specifically?
So the way that it's structured at Splash Damage, at
Mm-hmm.
least, and I
Mm-hmm.
know it's not the same way everywhere.
Yep.
What we have, so we have a tech art team, obviously, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not a very big team.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, unsure. I would say for the whole company, maybe we're between 10 and 15 maximum, rather
Okay.
towards
Right.
10.
Right.
I want to
So
say.
pretty small still.
And
Yeah,
that
for a team.
includes leads. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so I want to say something in that regard. And
Right.
it was smaller as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we just grew a little bit, but
Okay.
obviously people are leaving as well.
Right.
So it's I know that for them it's always a struggle to find good people.
Yeah.
But yeah, what we do is basically we have our specializations, and that can actually
Mm-hmm.
change per project. So in one project, you can mainly support, let's say, the environment team, the world team, and then
Right.
project ends, next project starts, or
Mm-hmm.
you get shifted around because of your skill set,
Right.
and suddenly you support the cinematics team or the
Okay.
UI team, right?
Right.
And that obviously depends on the person's preferences and the person's skills.
Right.
So you have a say in that. You can say, I
Mm-hmm.
really don't want to work on XYZ, right?
Okay.
Or I really, really want to work on this other thing.
Right.
But yeah, we're basically embedded in our external teams. We are we do speak every day amongst ourselves, obviously, but generally we are part. For example, I'm part of the content team. I'm part of the world team in that sense, and I support mainly environment artists, but also
Right.
sometimes level designers. And yeah, maybe there's someone else who only supports cinematics and maybe character. Another
Right.
person usually supports, I don't know, yeah, maybe UI or something like that, depending on where the need is. Also, there's different need throughout the project. So maybe in the beginning, there's more need towards standalone tools, then later
Right.
more need towards like support, and then optimization, and it shifts. And yeah, it can still happen that I get like a task from a different team and like, oh, you're the only one who's like semi-free. Can you please jump onto that? I'm like, okay,
Right.
I've not spoken to these people in a year, but fine. We're
I
gonna
mean,
solve it.
yeah, I was going to say, so it seems like a kind of almost daily thing where people are deciding where is the most need within the project, right? So, like, oh, well, this is the most important thing right now, so we can move Marina onto this, or maybe this something comes up all of a sudden, right? Okay, can we shift again? I mean, it's probably the more interesting role where you maybe maybe not know from day to day what you're doing, right? I mean, you maybe know from week to week, but it changes so rapidly that it would be very hard to be stagnated in that job, right? Because you wouldn't feel that you're doing the same thing every day, maybe because it sounds like you're constantly getting challenged all the time with what you're getting presented with. I mean, is that the case? Is it something that you find that you're going to work in every day as kind of like a new adventure or a new thing to find out and figure out problem solving wise?
I mean, being stagnant in this job, I think, is definitely possible.
Right.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
but it's something that I think, if it happens, should really not be encouraged, because it's hurting everyone
Right.
in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it really depends on the kind of project that you're working on and the kind
Right.
of product that you're shipping. Like if it's a game that just
Mm-hmm.
like same process, same idea over and over and over again, I can
Right.
very much think that there might not be the greatest new challenges that come around the corner every day. It might just be a revamp and a revamp and a revamp.
Right.
However, at least in my situation,
Mm-hmm.
we usually have a very good plan for the next couple of months, and it's
Right.
actually the lead tech artist's job
Mm-hmm.
to make this plan. And at least in my case, we are all involved, and we are being asked for our opinion and for our feelings, and
Mm-hmm.
um, for what we think is most important. And then
Right.
obviously other teams will make requests, but
Mm-hmm.
this will all be planned out in advance. So I
Mm-hmm.
know very well what is going to happen, let's say until the end of the year or something at least.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't mean that, let's say ad hoc, there isn't something where you have to help, or
Mm-hmm.
something goes wrong, something doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work out, you have to do it
Right.
differently, there's a change of plans.
Mm-hmm.
A deadline is moved, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That can all
Mm-hmm.
happen, but I would say in general, you do know quite well what you're working on.
Right. I mean, it seems like a great undertaking because, you've went from, again, like we talked about, you were a student, and you didn't work or have any experience within AAA. And, all of a sudden you are working in AAA and you're working these big IPs. And, like you said, you've had a great support system within your job, and you've had opportunities to feed back to people like, I'm enjoying this, I'm not enjoying this, I want to work in this, I don't want to work in this. I mean, it seems like a thing where, people talk about the game industry, especially that, I mean, maybe not so much in the UK, but I mean, I know in overseas people have had experiences, but not only being a tech artist within the industry, because that's such a niche job, but now, of course, the other niche that I was going to talk about briefly is the fact that you're also a woman working in games. So is that something that you found has been an advantage to your position or disadvantage, or has it just been not something at all that you've really thought about when you come into the role? And have your colleagues and your work also treated you different or the same or equal? How's that experience been for you so far within AAA? Which is a big subject. I know it's a huge can of
Yeah,
worms to open and
it's
talk
fine.
about, but yeah.
I must say, for me, it's always been a completely positive experience. I've never had any issues whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
That may come down to a degree also to my personality, because obviously
Mm-hmm.
everyone has a different personality, and some people
Of
are
course.
more prone to maybe being stepped over, because if you have somebody who is in your team who's like looking for a victim, and then it's like,
Yeah.
right, and I obviously never want that to happen, and you never want anyone to encourage this behavior. But
Of course.
I was very lucky that I was never perceived negatively in my confidence, if I want to say
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that women are sometimes titled bossy or
Right.
aggressive or something like that. Never ever
Yeah.
happened. It was always seen as something very positive. I was
Good.
always getting praise, I want to
Mhm.
say, for being assertive and for knowing what I want. Like, people are like,
Yeah.
oh, thank God somebody knows what they want. It's like, okay, cool, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So I never had any issues, and I was always like surrounded by an extremely supportive team. And I knew that if there had ever been any issues of any kind,
Right.
I would have always had the full backing of
Mhm.
my team and of the company, and so I never had any issues, fortunately.
Yeah, which is good, I think, and we did talk about this briefly kind of before we started talking officially on the podcast. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously been a bit of a nightmare for some people, but it's always good when you hear those positive experiences, because you want people to know, women especially, that it isn't always bad, right? It isn't always the horror stories that you hear. There are good studios, there are good people out there that are helping people grow, women grow, especially within tech. I mean, you talked about within your team specifically that you have a younger person who's in, another woman who's came into tech art and is also working up, and they've also been encouraged and helped along the way and pushed to do other things. So yeah, it was just briefly to talk about your experience, but it's good that it's positive. At least it's good that you're not regretting being there or regretting the things you've done. So yeah,
No,
I mean,
definitely.
within that, also within tech art, I mean, you've put up a couple of examples of stuff you've done in Gears Tactics with cinematics and the other pieces of maybe UI you've worked with in certain different aspects of the game. Is there anything that you found within tech that you've done over the last 2.5-3 years that you've been there that you've really honed in on? Is there something specifically that you've really found is a love or a thing you want to focus on more going on in the future?
I mean, to be honest, I want to go back to the roots in the future. I really would love to do more procedural work.
Okay.
Doesn't necessarily have to be Houdini, but I really enjoy making environment tools.
Right.
It's the thing I started off with. It's the thing that I found most enjoyable when I was studying. And I want to say that is something that I definitely would like to focus on more, because you just mentioned Gears Tactics, and there was I did the cinematics. I supported the cinematics team. I supported the UI team. I did lots and lots of, I think, very crucial in between work. Like for example, I worked on something that we called the convoy, which is like basically a feature of the game where you level up, where you dress your characters, where you change your gear, where you open loot boxes, where you kind of you stop. It's kind of this progression indicator,
Right.
which is a world in itself and has had tons and tons of challenges.
Right.
So really, that is what I did on Gears Tactics.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with what I did before. So actually going a bit more back to that, and actually being able to possibly also learn much more from people who have done this before and who are
Right.
able to teach me more in maths. I love
Yep.
maths. Again, would love to go much further into more environment focused tools, supporting environment teams. And
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, with regards to environment and with regards to the end result, and I mean, I think obviously it's been great that you've been able to post some work that you've done within the Gears universe as well. But it's a thing that I think came up time and time again when I openly talked about the question of, I'm going to have a tech artist on, is there anything you'd want to specifically ask them? People did come back to the kind of same questions, but one that I did notice that stuck out, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, in depth or a wee bit, but people talked about how you're kind of more like with a lot of things, maybe like even like UI, where you're kind of behind the scenes. You're maybe not making the flashy gun, the massive bomb, whatever the hell the characters. You're kind of like you said, the in between, right? You're helping those things connect. Is that something that's ever bothered you, or something that you think would ever make the job less enjoyable, or is it something you don't really think too much about?
it's a very interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
I think this really depends on the kind of audience you're talking about. Who are you
Right.
trying to flash? Are you trying to
Right.
flash the user, the player? Are you trying to flash your art colleagues? Are you
Right.
trying to flash the art students? Or
Yeah.
are you trying to flash the tech students and the tech people and
Right.
the graphics programmers or whoever? And I must say that number one, no, I never had an issue with any of that because I am still able to have a portfolio and I'm
Right.
still able to show people this is what I did.
Yeah.
It might not be the art part, but
Right.
once they understand what I did and what the
Yeah.
challenges were and
Mhm.
how it worked out, they're like, oh, that's so cool. That's interesting. Right? Tell me
Right.
more. So I still
Yeah.
get that exposure in that sense. And
Yeah.
I actually feel a lot happier
Mhm.
with maybe it's because I was never good at tech. Maybe it was because I was never good at maths. And then being able to
Right.
show something that I did and people being interested in it and actually understanding it and wanting to know more about it is all
Right.
that's all the recognition I need, really.
Yeah, of
Makes
course.
me
Yeah,
so
I think.
happy.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of twofold. There's definitely people who would think more of, well, I can't show off what I'm doing, or I can't show to other people. But then there's people also who are like, oh, I could work on a project for 4 or 5 years and have nothing in my portfolio. How
Yeah.
would that? Yeah, how would that be? So yeah,
Can suck. Yeah, that can really
yeah,
suck. If you're not allowed to
definitely.
even show anything at all, that's very sad, of course.
Yeah. I mean, especially I think within your case when you're working with the co-op version, when you're dealing with other companies and you're doing work for them. I mean, especially when I was back in Access in 2017, a lot of the guys I knew who worked there were always doing amazing work, but then there was always an element of if the company wasn't up for it, you couldn't show what you were working on. So you could work there a couple of years, do 5 or 6 cinematics, and then you couldn't show anything from that. And then you're trying to explain to other people what you done there and try to talk through it where it's such a visual art, you want to show something. So it's a fine line I think you've got to kind of balance when you work within this industry, is that you don't have to be flashy and be in front of everybody, but you also want to be able to show people that you have done something of value and you can show that to them, right?
Exactly. You do want to be able to build a track record, even if it's only going to be understood by a small percentage of the people. But that's fine with
Right.
me, right?
Yeah,
So I really, I mean, I really only once had the success art wise, right? So
Right.
it was only once that when I did the shantytown work that I basically that I had like my work being on the front page of ArtStation. That was great. It made me so happy. But honestly, after a week, it's like I forgot about it.
On to the next thing. Yeah. It's short lived.
Yeah, it's I don't do the job for fame at all. I know that many artists who are like, they have this, I need to show, and I have this following, and they have fans, right? I don't have any fans, so nobody. I'm just a person
That's
sitting.
Not true, Marina, because I told you today you do have one fan, and you have me. I'm a fan of your work as well. So yeah, you have some fans.
That's
I mean,
cute.
I think I've always said to people anyway within this industry that if you're getting in it for the glory, then you're in it for the wrong reasons.
No, don't.
No, even the people I know the people I know at the top of the game who are super famous and have all these followings, like they don't even really care about it. They're just like, it's a thing, it's happened, whatever, I'll move on. But
if you know that if you do it for it, like that actually never ever crossed my mind, to be honest. I'm just so happy doing the job itself. I don't need anything else. Like and then if I get that opportunity to at least like maybe document what I did, maybe make a little post, that makes me very happy. But it's also so much work. Like it's so much work to constantly post stuff. Like oh god, I hate social media so much. I can't be bothered.
I've totally. I mean, I'm coming off it more and more as time goes on. I mean, initially it was such a huge part because I was networking through it and I was meeting people, and luckily the fun of the job I have now. If you guys don't know, haha, surprise! I have a job now. I'm working with video. But the person who hired me was somebody I contacted almost 10 years ago. Before I even left my job, he was one of the first people that emailed, being like, "What is a concept artist?" And we built a relationship from there. But yeah, like it has its positives where like the networking stuff is great for initial workshops and meeting people, and obviously the podcast. But the only reason I keep doing this isn't really for the fame. It's the fact that like I get so many emails from people who are like, your podcast made me want to leave my job and go back to school. Like your podcast has inspired me. Like even when I went out to LA and the guy in the plane recognized me, and then people were coming and speaking to me about, oh, listen, like it just blew my mind. So it's a thing where it's not the fame I seek, but it's the idea that I'm helping people. Right? That's the biggest draw for me is that I'm helping somebody else succeed, because when I was coming up and starting out, there were so many people that helped me. You only just want to help everybody else on top of it. You just want to expand that network. So within like tech art especially, is that something you think about as well? Do you ever think about giving back or tutorials or helping people with stuff, or is it something that's ever crossed your mind?
Oh, definitely. I would love to. I really would love to.
Yeah.
I think, again, this is a me problem, that I'm
Right.
kind of like, do I have anything of value to share yet? Right?
Right.
I've only been in this job for 3 years, and you're not doing amazing glory work every day. You're actually probably not doing that crazy much of it in the process of a game. Like sometimes you
Right.
have a run and you're just like, cool problem, right?
Mhm.
But very often it's just like support, performance,
Right.
it's not the bugs
Yeah.
everywhere. So it's not something where you're like, I learned this amazing new skill and I want to show it off. It's just,
Right.
I would love to, really,
Yeah.
and I really envy people who are confident enough to kind of, and who have the knowledge and the experience to put themselves out there and make really interesting, helpful content.
Right.
And I think if I had anything where I felt
Mhm.
like, I would love to share this because I think it's new
Yeah.
or something, I would love to do it.
Mhm.
But maybe people have to help me to kind of be like, this would be cool. This would be cool. Because
Yeah.
for me, I'm always like, yeah, but is this cool enough? No.
Well, I mean, it's even the coolness factor. I think it's just obviously the thing I found within my section of looking at tutorials and speaking to people and speaking to students especially is because people think when they build portfolio stuff or they build even tutorials that they're having to appeal to like a wide gambit or like even professionals or people who are their peers. But with tutorials, what you're actually appealing to is the lowest common denominator. So people who are just starting, are just finding their feet, don't know anything about the software. That's your biggest draw. Like if I made tutorials now, I wouldn't make a tutorial for people who want to get into hard surface or Boolean or ZBrush or workflow like that. I'd build like an intro to Maya. Like this is the buttons you use to build a cube. This is how you Boolean. Like that kind of stuff is more or widely consumed than the niche stuff like at the higher level. You can build to those things and they will have an audience, but the biggest bulky stuff, especially like things like YouTube and even ArtStation, is the complete beginner's guide to like this is how you get into the software.
But there's already so many of those. There's so
but
many.
Not of Houdini, but Houdini
Really?
specifically. Well, I mean, like you said, you had the one that you kind of followed, but it's not a thing where you're trying to follow loads of people who are maybe trying it as a hobbyist, but you're a working professional, right? You're working in the industry, you have experience. So that stands you above everybody else because we know how hard it is, right? You and I both know how hard it is to get in this industry and maintain a job, and you've done it. So the thing is that you're coming from a place where you have something to say because you've achieved that, right? You've worked and built yourself a career in the industry. So you're not just some Joe on YouTube who knows nothing or is doing it in between their schoolwork at the weekends. I mean, like, there's plenty of people who teach Maya out there who are 15 years old, but they're no industry professionals, right?
I mean, let me tell you, imposter feelings never go away, no matter how much success you have in whatever traditional or non-traditional sense. So it's I'm not sure. I think if I wanted to make a tutorial, what I would probably do is really something like what you just mentioned, like
an intro thing.
But a big serious, like starting from nothing, but actually making something sick. And I think
I would buy that.
That is
I would
the difference.
buy that from you.
I tell you, and that to me is what makes a successful tutorial. So maybe I just found the code to a successful tutorial.
I mean, like, we were literally, when we were in university and we were learning Maya at the time, because we knew nothing about it, right? But we were going on YouTube and there was kids, 15, 16-year-old, were doing intro videos, and there was like 400,000 views on some of them because they were like so good, even though they were in the high squeaky voice and hey guys, I'm teaching Maya. Like the things they were talking about, I was like, oh my god, I never knew that many existed. And you can press the G key to repeat your last tool. Oh my god, I never. So like it doesn't really matter that the fact that like it's something that's like, oh, it's amazing and it's so cool, and you can the content doesn't have to be incredible as long as it's thorough, as long as it's in depth, as long as it's something that people can follow along and it's not too overly complicated. So yeah,
I mean, I think for me, again, the most important part about a tutorial is you start up with nothing, which means that you get people on board. which was something that I like. If I see a tutorial that starts with too much knowledge of a thing that I don't know about, I will not watch it because I'm going to feel bad. Like, I'm going to be very, I'm like, I cannot cross this hill before I can even understand what you're doing, so I'm not going to try it. So if you have a tutorial that starts from nothing, but you know that the end product is going to be sick, it's not going to be just like, oh, I learned this button click. That is something, okay, I will look at that now if I want specific knowledge, but if I'm a starter, right, what I will want is something sick that I can be happy about, proud about, maybe expand on in the end. So having this 0 to hero thing, maybe. And illustrating that this process isn't the craziest in the world.
Yeah, I mean, like even recently, like Chamfer Zone, Tim for Chamfer Zone just put a tutorial for Blender, which was building a Magnum. And for like me, that's the perfect thing, because like so many people I know want to build guns. So like the best way to get people into hard surface is you can build a gun, you can build an assault rifle, you can build a Magnum. So, you know, for like your Shantytown, for example, that, I mean, even since I saw that article years ago, before I even knew it was you that had done it, you know, I was looking at that thinking, God, that's so cool. Imagine being able to just press one. Because I mean, I know initially I looked at stuff like that with Leon Tucker, right? Because he was building through Cinema 4D, he was building those generation maps of buildings and then painting over the top of them. And I thought that generation aspect was always so cool. That was something I was like, I would love to get into that. And it's the same with me, where I'd love to get into tech art. I'd love to dive deeper because I already have a kind of foundation in environment art and in the tool sets, shaders, networks, node networks especially, that I'd want to expand on that, right? But the thing that's always put me off, and I know, speaking to Ian from Epic, a couple other guys, shout out Ian, that love that side of it, the tech art side of it, and already accomplished in environment art. The thing that's putting us off is the coding, is the math. But then listening to you talk through this whole interview, right, you spoke about how, well, I didn't know any math. I didn't know where to start. I didn't think I was great at it either, but I learned it. And that's the thing that gives me confidence to approach another subject. And I think with that knowledge, like, you could build something totally amazing that would feed so many people's inspiration to get into tech art, right? Which would be another great milestone for you, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I would definitely love to do that. I think right now, unfortunately, I have a lot on my plate.
Of course.
But obviously, there's always room in the future. And I mean, again, I only started 3 years ago, so give me some time. But it's
Yeah, but 3 years, I think, even in this industry and the way it moves and with the projects you've been involved in, you've covered a lot of ground, right? You've done probably more than you thought you were going to do initially when you joined the company.
I had no idea what I would even be doing. Like, I was completely oblivious to the job itself. I don't know how I got here.
Working in day one and they're sitting down in your chair, you're like, cool,
I'm confused.
So what are we doing? I press buttons, yes.
But splash damage was, and not like, I mean, when I say splash damage, what I mean is the people working there and working with me and having worked with me were the people, like, just made it so easy.
Right.
They made it so easy, and they made such a big effort to make me feel welcome and to support me because, as I said, unfortunately, many women, I think many starters anyway, but especially women who start off with something that they might have been afraid of earlier in their lives, they do have confidence issues, right? You're like, oh, I'm not good enough. Can I do this? Oh my God, are they going to fire me next week? Are they going to find out that it was a mistake that they hired me? Oh my God. So these kind of thoughts, I think everybody has them, but to a degree, sometimes I feel like it might be a little bit worse for women simply because you do not have the role models. And if I look around, like, I think we have less than, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think we have less than 10% of women in the studio who are not in, like, finance or HR, like actually deaf women. I think it's less than 10%. And I can definitely say that it feels like less than 10% for sure. So it's like you do not have the role models. I unfortunately, never had a female tech lead. So where do you take the confidence from? There's nowhere to take them from. So it's much hard. In my opinion, it's much harder. And seeing more female tech leads, and especially say tech leads, art leads, it's different. I think there's more going on there, more female tech artists and stuff, female environment artists, but especially female tech leads are like, I maybe have met one or two in my life.
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean, it's like a changing of the guard because, I mean, if we think about games really where it started from in the 70s and when it started to bloom in the 90s, you're only talking 20, 30 years ago. The industry is now starting to see a shift where diversity is a huge thing, and people are obviously hiring more women, more people of color. So there is a change there, but that's going to take. I mean, you think about even the film industry. I mean, the film industry now has only been about 100 years going, but then games are still so new that, I mean, I think something like, I think within Bloomberg, they were talking about an article where something like 80% of the jobs within tech haven't even been invented yet, right? Because we don't know what we're going to need specifically. Tech art is a brand new job. I mean, when I started in 2012 and I left my job, concept art was only just beginning to be a thing.
Interesting.
So yeah, I mean, and environment art's always kind of been there, but yeah, it's a weird place we're in right now, I think, within the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've built this whole appreciation for tech art and where you went for the start and where you're going back to, is there anything resource-wise you think you would shout out currently that is fulfilling that tech art niche? Is there anything? I mean, you've talked about the tutorial you've done initially, which we'll link below so people can check that out. But is there anything that you're looking at right now that is something that is taking your notice, or something you've noticed that's kind of popped up that you want to go back to and look at in more depth?
You mean like a topic or like a new area?
Yeah, anything you've seen recently in the last couple of months or the last even year that you've looked at and thought, I want to dive into that. That looks really interesting.
I mean, to me, that's actually shaders.
Right.
So I really want to get further into 3D graphics and the 3D graphics pipeline.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, materials and shaders are like just the applied end product to a degree, but I'm incredibly interested in the math behind 3D graphics, and I'm still a complete noob. Like, I'm just talking about, I'm just like dropping terminology that I have no clue about, but like I really would love to learn more about the 3D graphics pipeline, about how does it actually work, how is everything being actually translated into an image, how does it work, how can I write custom shaders. And I mean, materials are one thing, but I'm actually I prefer writing code, writing shader code specifically, because it is quite easy, in my opinion. It is not very complex in a sense, like, and I want to say something like C++ complex, like it's scripting to me, right? It's much easier, and I didn't have the time yet, and didn't have kind of the learning plan yet, but let's say I have the learning plan. I'm just not at that point yet, because I'm actually right now learning maths. Started with trigonometry, just finished trigonometry, and will soon move on to brush up my linear algebra skills. And once we've moved to a point where all of that is set, I think I would love to move towards the 3D graphics work much more.
Awesome. And stop. Right, okay, you can go. Take a break. Okay.
All right, cool. Right, see you in a bit.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, it's fine. On you go. Go. Yeah. So just kind of wrapping up or getting to the end game of this conversation, something that we've kind of came across or people have talked about, especially Ian Wisdom, shout out Ian, talked about, within engine specifically, either Unity, Unreal, or any other ones. What are some things you find that are good to learn or good to look into specifically within engine work when it comes to Unreal or Unity? Is there one you prefer also, or are they both maybe good at different things depending on what you're looking for?
I mean, I definitely choose a diplomatic answer and say that I think both are good in certain areas. For example, you're seeing lots of I want to say, for example, 2D games or mobile games, or games that need lots and lots of like custom shading work, very, very customized games being done in Unity.
Okay.
On the other hand, games that need an easy gateway into 3D environments are more likely being done in Unreal. And it really is a game of like picking what you would like to do, and then finding out what engine is the best for that. So I think I've rarely ever seen a 2D game done in Unreal. For example, that's one example. But for example, I'm just playing a game. It's called Children of Morta.
Okay.
It's like a roguelike, really, really beautiful, beautiful game. It's has like a it's like a dungeon. You shoot through dungeons and you kind of um progress in this beautiful story of a family. But it's basically very flat. It's like it's pixel art, and
Okay.
it's like a 2.5D perspective.
Right.
But I know there's much of fakery going on there, and I know they're using Unity, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just interesting what you can do with engines in general. They're so flexible now to really anything you want to do within a project. I mean, I know famously a couple of years back, I had this whole conversation with somebody about Breath of the Wild, right, Zelda, because one of the biggest appeals about that game is the fact that graphically under the hood, it's not showing anything incredible, but the way they've used their shaders, the kind of toon shaders that they're using in that game, it gives it that look. And that came back to when you listen to the team years ago, they were remastering Wind Waker, right? And you noticed that the toon, way they had basically made Wind Waker, years later when they were remastering it still looked good because of the way the shaders worked. So I think there's definitely a whole thing on shaders that it seems like a magic is going under the hood that we don't really think about, but it can be very powerful when it comes to games, right?
Oh, definitely. And writing custom shaders in Unreal is a pain. I've actually never done it, but everybody who
Okay.
had is like, it's the worst. It's horrible. Don't. You have to edit like a million different files, and
Right.
I'm gonna do it in the future because I'm very interested. But that's what I
Right.
heard. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, in Unity is like super duper easy, like new shader, and then you write. That's what you
Right.
do.
Yeah.
Right.
Super
So
duper easy at you, like not
no.
everybody
I mean
else.
the process, not no. I mean,
Okay.
the process of actually making a new shader, and with
Right.
shader I mean something that contains code,
Right.
is super duper easy in Unity. And I know in Unreal you can use a custom node and you can like type your code in there. But I
Right.
mean, have a look at the custom node, and you're gonna probably run away screaming because you obviously have to. You have to write it in a different program where you actually have proper highlighting, and then you copy it in the custom node. And
Right.
if you then want to use the custom node with Unreal specific material nodes, you're going to be very concerned about performance.
Right.
If not, I think it's okay. But like the both together are kind of like, but can be a performance problem. But like,
Right.
there's all these different things. So I think
Of
each engine
course.
has their right to exist. And
Right.
I, for myself, I'm just so much more comfortable with Unreal right now. But
Right.
actually, as I told you before, I would love to go more into 3D graphics. I'm
Right.
definitely going to do much more with Unity because it is so easy to just write code.
Right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a thing where I think you have to find your own path, your own way of specializing things that you find you're comfortable with. I mean, with optimization, especially within pipelines, I mean, when do you feel, I mean, you might not be making that call because you're not a lead, you're not maybe higher up, but is there a point your team gets to where you feel like something is optimized enough, or is there always continuously something you can change or optimize? Is it always just a constant evolution process?
I mean, you can obviously doctor around on the product forever. If you ask any artist, they can probably continue to fiddle around with their work forever, but it's probably not very good. I mean,
Right.
in tech art, it's a tiny bit different because we do have data to back up our work and to be like, okay, we can see that this is not going as good as it should be. But to be
Right.
honest, once you're hitting your frame rate targets, once you're all right with like reading from disk and everything
Right.
comes together and you don't have frame drops. For example, if your target is, let's say, 60 FPS at full HD, or I don't know, 30 FPS at 4K or something like that, whatever it might
Right.
be. Once you have hit that target consistently and your publisher is happy, that's when you're shipping basically, right?
Right.
And you
Yeah.
ship the game. And if it's a live product, obviously you will continue to improve areas, but you will have to actually prioritize new content. So new content will
Right.
need to be worked on first, and you don't even have the opportunity to kind of continue working on the same thing forever because it's not feasible. So
Right.
once it's good enough, and
Right.
you have to leave it.
Yeah, I think it's always the constant thing within even art that when is something done right? When do you walk away? When do you leave something? It can be a judgment call, but sometimes it's just like you said, it's deadlines, it's productivity, it's a budget, it's something that you need to adhere to, because if you go beyond, then of course you're going to upset somebody like the producers or the content creators. So yeah, I mean, and again, you're wanting things to be as smooth as possible, so you're not going to iterate too much into the fact that you break something, because if you're going to break something, then everybody else's day's halted. So yeah, I mean, engines, God, they're a mess. But I suppose the one thing we'd want to ask you as well is that now getting into tech art and the way that things look within Houdini and learning process, is there any tips you think you could give to people, maybe even something you would say to yourself when you were starting that you wish you'd known then, but you know now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, something that I would have told myself back then is that we all just cook with water, I want to say. So there is, even though I know people tend to use these terms with like, oh, it's magic, you're magicians,
Right.
wizards. I know this term Houdini wizards.
Right.
I actually don't like that at all. I don't
Right.
like people calling me that, and I don't think it's very healthy because it puts people on a pedestal.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas I think that many of us are much more capable than they think. And
Yep.
again, once you put the fear aside and once you kind of
Mhm.
sit down, you're like, okay, this never has to see the light of day. Nobody ever has to know about this. I'm
Right.
not being judged on this. I'm simply
Mhm.
doing this for my own uh
Edification. Yeah.
yeah, just like
Yeah.
education, exactly. And just because I'm interested in something, you don't
Mhm.
have to be good at it. And I think
Right.
that's very important, and that's something I still tell myself to this day, because I think most of us humans have a
Mhm.
little bit of fear of starting something new
Yes.
and starting something they haven't done before. It's just evolutionary, makes sense to be a little
Yes.
bit afraid of it, right?
Of
But
course.
there's no tiger biting you around the corner. Nothing bad is going to happen ever.
Right.
So I think that is also for students especially.
Mhm.
Use the time that you have, like the time you have in a course. You also, if you pay money for your course or whatever,
Mhm.
you are not there for the teachers or for the stuff that they teach you. You are there for the time that
Mhm.
you have. You're there because, and it makes sense only because you have an allotted time in your
Mhm.
life where you can do
Mhm.
nothing but follow what you're interested in. And especially when it comes to a subject like
Mhm.
game development,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna tell you what that is. Right? It's
Yeah.
like, honestly, in my university, I don't think people even knew about stuff like UI design. I've never
Right.
once heard our professors use these words. But
Right.
UI design, UI art, UI programming are such viable careers.
Yes.
I don't think they knew anything about that. Or at
Yeah.
least they didn't share it with us, right? There were no
Right.
courses on that. There was nothing on that, right?
Yeah.
So you still become a UI designer, be very successful, right?
Mhm.
So it's like people are sometimes very narrow focused in a bad
Mhm.
sense, and
Right.
kind of just chilling out and recognizing that you have this immense privilege of time that you will
Mhm.
most likely never have again in your life to do
Right.
what you are interested in, like really
Yeah.
use it. And it made my heart bleed when I saw my fellow students game away their time and calling it research. I think that's the most laughable thing ever. I hope nobody's doing that anymore, but probably some people are. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's very sad because you even though games are fun,
Right.
making games is a really, it's like a trade, I want to say. It's like something you learn. It's a physical thing you do.
Right.
It's not theoretical, and you can't just like write your exams and get a job, right? You have to do it.
Right.
It's like a trade.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, use the time and make the best of it.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's a thing. Even now, you're finding that you can still. I mean, if you love games, you can still. I mean, you told me yourself you're playing something right now, right?
Mhm.
So as long as you're in balance with everything, like as long as you're giving enough time to your studies, enough time to everything else, you can fit those things in like gaming. It's just that you can't do it for 8 hours a day. You
Oh
can't
no.
fill. Yeah, you can.
It's
I
a
mean, there was
hobby. It's not, honestly, gaming is a hobby, and if your hobby takes up most of your day, it's no longer a hobby, it's an occupation. If it
exactly.
doesn't pay, you have a problem on your hands, right?
Yeah, I think it was Justin Fields was saying something about it, healing for somebody else. Is that there's a time in your life when you need to stop playing games and start making them,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
So I think, and I feel that the stuff I'm doing now is more rewarding than any game I could play. Like the idea of me creating something from nothing and existing in the world, and people, the other day we released some early footage of stuff we were building, because we've been very transparent with the people who are fans of the game. And the fact that people were in the Discord, constantly going like, "Oh my god, this looks incredible!" and "Wow," like that gave me more satisfaction than any game I've ever played. So I think it's a thing where people might not see the instant gratification where they're like feeding back and getting instant results because of the culture we live in, but it's a hard work thing that pays off eventually. And it's hard to translate that, I think, into students when they want to just like make a gun or make something cool and have it pop up on the screen. Is that something you find as well with younger people that you've talked to within art and tech industry?
What exactly?
That they need an instant gratification or instant kind of dopamine feedback?
I wouldn't even say it's a problem with it's a thing with younger people. I think it's our generation. Like, I'm a millennial, right?
Same.
And I kind of feel like simply because of the actually non-voluntary overconsumption of media that we've been subject to, I think many of us have a huge attention problem, and I have one too. I block all social media, I block all online shopping, I block all of that during the day. I don't have it on my phone because I know that like it's an attention grabbing machine and your attention is their currency, right?
Yeah.
So what I really feel is that our generation and anybody who comes after us, you are used to this quick turnaround of I do a tiny thing and I bling bling bling, everything goes great and I feel amazing. But it's hard work, and and just because it's on a PC, just because it's like using the internet and you're doing something on a PC that kind of might feel like gaming sometimes, it's actually really, really hard work, and it's something where you have to concentrate and be very diligent with. And if you do not understand that, and if you do not understand that while you're studying, you are going to have a problem, or you're going to learn it like the very, very hard way, in a sense, because you're not going to be able to find a job, because people will notice your attitude, like the attitude, how you go about it. And as I said before, like, I still find that wild, but when I was studying, I was treating it like a job, because it is your job. And you should put in the time that somebody who has a job puts in. Usually, obviously, you can be lenient. You're like let's say you're a freelancer, right? But you still have to put in the time. And you are your own boss, because there's nobody who's going to be like, do it better, right? It's all on you, and that's a huge pressure anyway. But I still remember that, like, some of my the people I studied with, and even some of the professors, they're like, "Oh, Marina, you're in the university every day. I always when I come in, I always see you sitting at your PC." And I'm like, "Yeah, but where should I be? Like, this is how it's supposed to be." And otherwise it's just because the industry and like the work we do is so faceted, and there is so incredibly much that you could do. If you don't put in the effort or like the diligence, and I don't say do overtime, I just say be consistent and make an effort, you're not going to be able to get a foot on the ground, right?
I mean, like, even the thing I found recently where, like, I mean, I'm still in the mode where I feel like I need to be constantly working on my portfolio because it's something that's just been ingrained into me. But I do know the first maybe 2 weeks I was working on my new job, I did at the weekends take time off and play the game just for fun, went outside and spent some time. Like, it's a thing where you'll have to be disciplined to get into the job. But once you're in and you have your foot in the door, you're working, you can come home at night because you've worked all day, right? You work 8 hours on a job. You can sit and just chill and watch TV.
Definitely.
It's a thing I think people think where we get in the industry is that you're constantly going to be working, you're constantly going to be stressed and panicking. It's an industry like any other.
It shouldn't be like that. If it is like that, there's a problem.
Yeah. I was going to say, because I mean, if you're working 8 hours on a job, you are learning during the job. Like, the things you'll do at your job are things that are challenging you. You're learning from them. You're expanding your knowledge. It's not like when you're studying where you have to study and you have to be disciplined because you don't want to do anything else and waver from that. But once you're in a job and you're working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, you are still expanding. So you're allowed to have time off. You're allowed to take the weekends off or sit and chill. Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, absolutely everyone, no matter in what situation they're in, is allowed to have time off. And I think
Of course, yeah,
like it's
yeah.
just it's something. Unfortunately, I must say, when I was a student, I also, especially in my last project, I worked way too much, and I can tell you that I still feel the negative side effects of that. So I am very, very, very. I think it's very problematic when people also post these attitude promoting things like, oh, work
The
until
hustle,
you're. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely against that. Please do not bring this into the industry again.
yeah,
If I see that in my team, I'll be very, very pissed. And it's not supported by, like, good people in the industry no longer support this because it grinds you down. Like,
good.
it kills you, and it makes no sense.
Mhm.
So what I would always say is, also as a student, I know it's hard. I know you have a goal, but try to be consistent and rather think in the long term, because you have
Yes,
to do this for many, many years if you're successful, right?
yep.
So also for my younger self, I would be like, okay, do you think it's really that important that you cannot finish like a week later or 2 weeks later? Is it that
Right,
important? It usually
yeah,
isn't, right?
yeah, yeah,
But obviously, if you're enthusiastic and that all is fine, it's great. Like,
yeah,
do it as long as you're healthy, right? And you're
yes,
honest to yourself.
yep.
And then when it comes to your job, obviously, I would always do a little calculation, right? Let's say you
Mm-hmm.
were on your job and before you've been hustling, right? Try to get the
Mm-hmm.
job. So when you're learning tons and
Mm-hmm.
tons on the job, I would
Mm-hmm.
say don't do extra work, or like, don't feel obligated to learn more at home, right? Take the
Yes.
time off, chill, you're learning tons on the job.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel that you are stagnating on the job to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
or it's not that interesting, whatever, you have some
Mm-hmm.
downtime,
Mm-hmm.
I would say really try to, like, if your frame of mind allows it, really try to do more and use the time that to get better at whatever you're interested in, right?
Yeah.
And that is generally, like, for example, yeah, starting a new job, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot, right? So don't
Yeah.
overburden yourself. Once you've
Mm-hmm.
gotten settled, once everything is in place, maybe start
Yeah.
doing something else again.
Yeah.
That's usually how I would
Yeah.
approach it.
Yeah, I've been the same. I mean, I do my days now. I'm kind of clocking in and doing my 8 hours. But then outside of that, I'm chilling. I'm making dinner. I'm hanging out with my spouse because, I never really got to do that before. So, yeah, I'm definitely. But now it's been about a month. I'm getting to a point where I'm like, cool. I can, like, yesterday I done a Blender tutorial. I was like, cool. Let's dive into Blender again. Try and learn that. And just something small, fun, a wee project. It was only a couple
Mm-hmm.
of hours. And then again today, I'm like worked again on a scene in Maya, like building something up again for our portfolio piece. So, I mean, like, those things are coming back. But the great thing about where I'm now within the industry, because I'm now being paid, it takes that pressure off. Where I'm
Oh,
like,
yes.
where's my next paycheck coming from? How am I going to pay the bills? Now that pressure's off, when I'm doing art, I don't feel as burdened, or I don't feel as panicky, because I can just do it for my own satisfaction. It's not for
Yeah.
a portfolio piece that needs to be out by this time because I need to find a job. It's like, well, I've got a job, I've got an income, I can chill a bit. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
true. It
yeah,
does. It does really. It does take the fear away from learning. You no longer learn to do something because you have to. You
yeah,
now are free to choose, and you should really continue to develop, right?
yeah,
But it's much less likely that you will have this element of fear. And I know
right,
most students, even though it's not healthy, most students who want to find a job, obviously they have this element of fear because you don't know what's happening. It's a huge transition. It's totally normal. But it was also for me a great, great relief once that came off, really.
yeah. I mean, fear is the natural driver, right? We've been programmed our whole entire existence on this earth to be fearful of stuff because it keeps us safe, right? If you're usually technically fearful of something because you want to protect yourself from being disappointed or being upset or being burnt
Mm,
out. So, it's a totally natural feeling, and it is shitty. But, like, once you overcome it and realize that it's just part of the process, then you will eventually come out on the other end a better person for it. And, honest to God, it's from. I used to work in a job where I could do nothing most days and get paid to do it, but
mm,
now I'm in an industry where I have to constantly prove my skills to
mm.
be validated, to get money. The last 5 years have definitely shaped me into a better person, and I'm totally different at 35 than I was at 30, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a thing where I like the new version of me. I like the fact that like I'm very confident on my own. I'm very confident in my skills. I can learn better than I used to learn because I've been out of school for so long. I know how to research stuff, study, take breaks. You know, like that's a thing that it can take years for some people to get to that point. It's not something that'll happen overnight or within a month. It is a real long-term process, and like you said, you have to get comfortable in the fact that, you know, if you only get, you know, these hours this week and these hours next week, well, that's fine because you have potentially your entire life to learn the subject. So, you know, and the way things are rated, the way the speed people are learning, you know, you're only going to get better quicker because there's so much information out there that's easily available. So yeah, don't panic about times and you know, I remember once I was watching a panel. It was somebody at Comic-Con, and they were talking to comic artists. And one of the guys said, you know, I'm 17 years old. I'm going to be graduating high school next year. What do you think I could do within the next year to guarantee me a job in comics? And the guy was like, "Are you dying? Or are you dying of some deadly disease? Is there something going on? We're not, you know, like you're 17 years old, man. Like you've got plenty of time. Like if you aim to have a job in comics by maybe 24 years old, then you've succeeded. Like, you know, like you don't have to jump out of school and straight into a job. It is, you know,
absolutely. Yeah. And I can tell you from my experience, I left school, I think with 19. So I on schedule left with 19. And I didn't feel ready for studying. And I think that's perfectly all right to say. So I did the apprenticeship where I was able to stay in my hometown. Again, wasn't very confident. But I learned like Photoshop, learned some InDesign, and had some time to fiddle around, kind of get used to digital things. Which is wild thinking back now. Like I was such a different person back then, but that also speaks to the fact that development is something that can happen to anyone. I want to say if you want it badly enough. So yeah, and just thinking back that I started studying, I think when I just turned 21, so 2 years later, and I signed my first. So and I did freelance work during my studies. By luck and chance and lots of good fortune, I got some really nice freelance work for film stuff, independent film stuff, which was great and helped me finance a lot. But then my very first contract at Splash Damage, I signed right before my 25th birthday. So I was still 24 and I started the job actually at 25. So I always had these feelings of being too old, actually. So even though now thinking back, 24, 25, that's not old. But I was like, oh my God, I'm so old. Oh no, I'm so old. Like other people, they're 21 and having a job. And I'm like, but you know, you don't know their experience. You don't know how they feel about it. You don't know whether it actually works for them. So for some people, like I've met people at Splash Damage who are a couple years younger than me and so mature and so great at their job. I'm like, I wish I was this mature at your age. And it's like, oh man. But it's just not for everyone. You know, people are different and they develop differently. And I feel like giving yourself the space to grow into what you would love to be is something that it's a luxury that everybody has. They just have to use it, I think. Like, don't stress yourself about it. Obviously, don't slack off, right? If you're slacking off, that's a problem. But if you know in your heart that you're doing all you can, don't stress yourself even more. So yeah, I don't know. I felt old. I still feel old. I think I always feel old, but it's just, I think it's a me problem.
36, get my first job, like fucking hell, like I signed my contract when I turned 36, so I mean, like that's, I mean, but then it's funny though because when I went to IMAG in Paris a couple of years back, and I first met Yama Yubrev. I mean, Yama was in other industries and other jobs, and he really got into working for Star Wars when he was like I think just in his 40s. So. And yeah, I mean, I was an engineer till I was 29, and then left my job to go back to uni. So, you know, age is not a thing. You don't have to worry about being older as long as you're good at your job. Yeah.
Yeah. Get some Botox. Look young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a good point to leave it. I think we can always come back and do more talks and get you on again. But you have a life also, and somebody who's probably waiting for you to join them for the evening's festivities. So shout out David. But yeah. So thank you for coming on. It was.
Thank you for having me.
a great honor to talk to you. I'm sure people have learned a lot. If anybody has any questions, Marina, and you want to leave them down in the comments, if you're listening on Spotify or any other Google podcast systems or iTunes, check out the YouTube interview. We have a video feed, and we'll also leave all links in the descriptions for any tutorials we've covered or any other talks that we want to highlight. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you've got to the end, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Again, comments, likes, and subscribing also helps us out. And make sure you share this podcast with everybody you know that wants to know about tech art and, of course, just working in gaming. And we'll see you guys again. Thanks again to you for listening. Thanks, Marina, for coming on. And peace out, guys. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Bye-bye.